Every major financial collapse in recorded history has been preceded by a chilling, unnatural silence. It is not the silence of a market that has stopped moving, but the predatory silence of an entity that has already calculated the outcome and is simply waiting for the clock to run out. You went to sleep last night believing that your life, your savings, your mortgage, and your future were governed by the democratic laws of your nation and the competitive spirit of a free market. You were wrong. The reality of the world you inhabit is far more coordinated, far more clinical, and far more terrifying than any political debate or news cycle would ever dare to suggest. We are currently living in the elongated shadow of a $10 trillion entity that has achieved what the Roman Empire, the British Crown, and the Napoleonic war machine never could: the total silent and digital ownership of the human infrastructure. To truly grasp the scale of what we are discussing, you must first unlearn the very vocabulary of wealth that you have been taught. Most people think in thousands. They struggle to save a few $100,000. The wealthy think in millions. The elite think in billions. But the architects of the current global transformation, the ones who sit in the quiet, high-altitude boardrooms of Manhattan, they think exclusively in trillions. $10 trillion is a number that the human biological brain is not evolved to comprehend. It is an abstraction of power so vast that it ceases to be money and becomes a force of nature. If you were to spend $1 million every single day since the birth of Christ, you would still not have spent $10 trillion today. It is a sum that exceeds the combined GDP of almost every nation on Earth, excluding the two largest superpowers. And yet, this mountain of capital is managed by a single firm, headquartered in a nondescript glass building in Midtown Manhattan. This is not just a company. It is the fourth branch of the government, the central nervous system of global finance, and the primary architect of the world you will be forced to inhabit by the end of this decade. The genesis of this $10 trillion shadow began not with a grand conspiracy, but with a humiliating failure. In the early 1980s, a young, ambitious trader named Larry Fink lost $100 million at the investment firm First Boston. He had made a bet on interest rates, and he had been wrong. For most men, a $100 million mistake is the end of a career, a permanent stain of incompetence. But for Fink, it was the catalyst for a lifelong obsession with the elimination of human error. He realized that the human brain was too slow, too emotional, and too deeply flawed to navigate the mounting complexities of a globalized, hyper-connected financial system. He became obsessed with the idea of a machine that could see the future, not through mystical means, but through the cold, relentless, and total processing of every data point on the planet. This obsession birthed BlackRock in 1988, but more importantly, it birthed the machine known as Aladdin. Aladdin is an acronym for the Asset, Liability, Debt, and Derivative Investment Network. It is, quite simply, the most powerful artificial intelligence ever constructed, and it is the reason why BlackRock is the most influential institution in the history of human civilization. Aladdin does not merely track stock prices or bond yields. It tracks the weather patterns in the American Midwest that dictate the future price of corn. It tracks the real-time shipping manifestos of every vessel in the South China Sea. It monitors the energy consumption of every major industrial factory in Europe. It analyzes your personal credit card transactions, your social media sentiment, and the vacancy rates of every apartment complex in the Sun Belt. Every second of every day, Aladdin runs millions of Monte Carlo simulations, predicting how every conceivable event, from a regional skirmish in the Middle East to a sudden change in a local tax code, will ripple through the global flow of capital. Today, Aladdin does not just manage BlackRock's $10 trillion. It acts as the risk management platform for nearly every major bank, insurance company, and sovereign wealth fund on the planet. In total, Aladdin oversees more than $21 trillion in assets. This means that a single digital mind, owned by a single private company, has its electronic finger on the pulse of every third dollar in existence. The danger of this concentration of power is not found in the money itself, but in the pattern. History shows us that whenever wealth and information become this centralized, the system ceases to be a market and becomes a plantation. We are currently navigating stage 3 of a 4-stage historical cycle that has destroyed every global reserve currency for the last 5 centuries. Stage 1 is the creation of a monopoly on money. Stage 2 is the expansion of that money into an empire of debt. Stage 3 is the consolidation of all tangible physical assets by the lenders. And Stage 4 is the reset, the moment where the population is left holding worthless paper while the architects of the system retain the world's actual physical resources. If you look around you today, the symptoms of Stage 3 are everywhere. You see inflation eroding the purchasing power of your labor. You see housing prices reaching heights that make the dream of homeownership a statistical impossibility for the next generation. You see small, independent businesses being systematically hollowed out while the same 5 megacorporations grow larger, more insulated, and more powerful. This is not the result of a malfunctioning economy. It is the result of an economy functioning exactly as intended. This is the ownership trap. In the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, a crisis that BlackRock was hired by the government to help resolve, a fundamental shift occurred in the philosophy of the elite. They realized that owning paper money was no longer a viable long-term strategy. Paper money can be printed into infinity, as we have seen with the trillions of dollars created since 2020. To survive the inevitable collapse of the currency, they realized they must own the hard assets: the land, the energy, the water, and the walls. This is the precise reason why institutional investors have moved with such predatory speed to acquire thousands of single-family homes across the globe. They are not looking for a quick profit or a speculative flip. They are looking for permanent generational rent seekers. They are engineering a world governed by a subscription model. In this future, you will subscribe to your transportation, you will subscribe to your software, you will subscribe to your entertainment, and eventually you will subscribe to the very roof over your head. If you own nothing, you have no leverage. If you have no leverage, you have no freedom. You become a permanent digital serf on a global estate managed by an algorithm. This is the Great Reset in its most clinical, stripped-down form. The $10 trillion shadow is moving into the physical world, claiming the soil, the bricks, and the lifeblood of the economy, while you are distracted by the noise of the political theater. The historical parallels are as clear as they are terrifying. Consider the Dutch East India Company in the 17th century. At its zenith, it was worth the equivalent of nearly $8 trillion in today's currency. It possessed its own private army, its own currency, and the sovereign power to declare war on nations. It controlled the spice trade, which was the critical data of the colonial era. When the Dutch East India Company became more powerful than the very government that chartered it, the entire system began to rot. The pursuit of an absolute monopoly led to the debasement of the currency, the stagnation of the middle class, and the eventual collapse of the Dutch Golden Age. The exact same pattern repeated with the British East India Company and the British Empire, its eventual reliance on the Bank of England to finance its overextension. Every single time the conclusion is identical. The centralizing entity survives the collapse by migrating its capital into the next rising power, while the common citizen is left to scavenge in the ruins of the old order. Today, we are witnessing the $10 trillion shadow executing this very stage 4 migration. While the mainstream media obsesses over the optics of trade wars and the heated rhetoric between the West and the East, the actual flow of capital tells the real story. During the height of the most recent geopolitical tensions, the world's largest asset managers were not retreating from the emerging power centers. They were doubling down. They were opening new corporate headquarters in Beijing, launching massive new investment funds tailored for the Chinese market, and integrating the two financial systems at a level of complexity that makes the concept of decoupling a mathematical joke. They are building the lifeboats for themselves while the ship of the Western middle class is still taking on water. They are positioning themselves to be the managers of the next empire, ensuring that no matter which flag flies over the capital, the $10 trillion shadow remains the true sovereign. This brings us to the most uncomfortable concept in all of finance, the exit liquidity. In the brutal language of the trading floor, exit liquidity refers to the unsuspecting, uninformed buyers who buy an asset at its absolute peak, providing the smart money with the opportunity to sell and exit the position with a profit. In the context of the global macroeconomy, you and your retirement fund and your pension are the exit liquidity. Your 401k is being used to prop up a domestic stock market that is being hollowed out from the inside. They tell you to stay the course. They tell you that the fundamentals are strong. They tell you that Mehangai, inflation, is merely transitory. They do this because the system requires a buyer on the other side of the trade, while the architects quietly move their personal wealth into gold, silver, physical land, and the strategic infrastructure of the next global era. The crash of 1929 was not caused by a sudden lack of money. It was caused by a sudden collision with reality. The market had become a hall of mirrors where debt was treated as an asset and speculation was treated as a virtue. When the mirror finally shattered, those who had faithfully followed the pro-rata experts and the bank-sponsored analysts were wiped out in less than 2 months. The people who survived, and indeed thrived, were the ones who recognized the pattern. The ones who realized that the concentration of credit and the exponential expansion of the money supply were not signs of prosperity, but signs of an imminent reset. We are seeing those same signals today, amplified by 1,000. The concentration of the entire stock market into a handful of tech monopolies, the explosion of global debt to over $300 trillion, and the silent, massive selling by corporate insiders are all flashing red. The $10 trillion shadow is as much a psychological construct as it is a financial one. It relies entirely on your apathy. It thrives on your distraction. It requires you to be too tired from the daily struggle for survival to look up and see the mechanics of your own obsolescence. They want you to argue about the nuances of partisan politics while they own the infrastructure of both sides. They want you to obsess over the latest viral outrage while they focus on the next 50 years of resource acquisition. But the pattern is visible to anyone who dares to ignore the noise and study the data. The debasement of your currency is not a failure of policy. It is a deliberate feature of the transition. The digital social credit systems being tested are not about safety. They are about the management of a population that no longer owns its own assets. If you wish to understand what the next decade holds, you must stop listening to the scripted words of politicians and start following the $10 trillion. It is moving away from the hands of the individual and into the vaults of the institutional owner. It is moving away from paper promises and into the hard reality of physical commodities. It is moving toward a world of total transparency for the citizen, where every transaction is tracked and every movement is logged, and total secrecy for the owners. Aladdin has already calculated the trajectory. It knows that a system built on $36 trillion of unpayable debt must eventually be liquidated. The only question that remains is whether you will be a victim of that liquidation or a prepared witness to it. The history of our world is not a history of progress, but a history of wealth transfers. From the feudal lords to the merchant kings, from the merchant kings to the central banks, and now from the central banks to the algorithms. You have the opportunity, perhaps for the last time, to recognize the pattern before the loop closes. The warning signs are no longer subtle whispers. They are the deafening roars of a bond market in crisis, the soaring prices of gold, and the empty shelves of the silver dealers. The shadow is growing because the light of the 20th century economic order is fading. You cannot stop the machine, for it is built into the very fabric of our digital existence, but you can choose not to be its fuel. You can choose to understand the mechanics of the ownership trap. You can choose to diversify your life away from the paper illusions that they provide. And you can choose to wake up to the reality that in a world governed by $10 trillion shadows, the only thing you truly own is your awareness of the game. The pattern is undeniable, and it is absolute. Stage 1, the monopoly. Stage 2, the debt. Stage 3, the ownership. Stage 4, the reset. We are standing at the very edge of Stage 3. The trigger for the final reset could be any number of things. A bank failure in a distant land, a calculated geopolitical spark, or a simple decision by the AI itself to initiate a global deleveraging. When the moment arrives, it will not be gradual. It will be fast, it will be violent, and it will be final for those who mistook the shadow for the substance. The secret company that owns the world does not require your permission to change the rules. They only require your silence and your ignorance. But now, you have seen the shadow, you have seen the machine, you have seen the pattern. The future is no longer a mystery, it is a mathematical inevitability. The only remaining variable in this equation is you. The sheer mass of $10 trillion acts like a gravity well, pulling every smaller entity toward its center. When a single firm owns a significant stake in every major airline, every major media outlet, every major food producer, and every major pharmaceutical company, the concept of competition becomes a fairy tale told to students. In reality, it is a single organism with thousands of heads. When you walk down the aisle of a grocery store, you see hundreds of brands, but the profits from almost all of them flow back to the same 3 or 4 institutional silos. This is the illusion of choice. This is the horizontal and vertical integration of the entire human experience. And the machine, Aladdin, ensures that this integration is perfect, that no resource is wasted, and that no threat to the system is allowed to mature. We must also consider the role of ESG, environmental, social, and governance scores. This is the moral layer, that the $10 trillion shadow has draped over the global economy. By controlling the flow of capital, they can dictate the behavior of every corporation on Earth. A company that does not comply with the dictates of the shadow is simply starved of capital. Their stock is sold, their credit is cut off, and they are replaced by a more compliant competitor. This is how you change the culture of a civilization without ever firing a single shot or passing a single law. You simply make the alternative too expensive to exist. This is the ultimate form of soft power, and it is being wielded by people you did not elect and whom you cannot fire. As we move deeper into this decade, the pressure will only increase. The currency will continue to lose its value, forced by the sheer weight of the debt that must be serviced. The experts will continue to provide explanations that blame the weather, the war, or the greed of the common man, but you will know better. You will know that the inflation is the sound of the machine consuming the last of the middle class's wealth. You will know that the volatility in the markets is the sound of the smart money exiting the burning building, and you will know that the push for a central bank digital currency is the final brick in the wall of the ownership trap. The $10 trillion shadow is not a monster to be feared, but a system to be understood. It is a logical, mathematical response to a world that has abandoned the gold standard and replaced it with an empire of pure imagination. Since 1971, when the last link to reality was severed, we have been living in an era of pure financial engineering. The shadow is simply the ultimate engineer. It has built a bridge to a new world, but that bridge is only wide enough for the elite and their machines. For everyone else, the bridge is a trap. The pattern of 1929 told us that when the debt becomes unpayable, the assets must be seized. The pattern of 2008 told us that when the banks fail, the public must pay for their resurrection. The pattern of today tells us that when the system itself reaches its limit, the system must be replaced by something even more total. You are witnessing the birth of that new system. It is a system of total ownership, total surveillance, and total control. It is a world where privacy is an antique concept and ownership is a luxury for the few. But there is a flaw in the machine. The flaw is that it relies on the continued belief in its inevitability. It relies on the idea that there is no alternative, that the shadow is too big to escape. But history also tells us that no empire, no matter how digital, no matter how well financed, lasts forever. The very concentration of power that makes the shadow so formidable also makes it brittle. It is a system built on debt, and debt is a promise that cannot always be kept. When the promises are finally broken, the shadow will vanish, leaving behind only the hard reality of what remains. Your task is to ensure that what remains belongs to you. To do this, you must opt out of the psychological trap. You must stop measuring your wealth in their debasing currency and start measuring it in tangible reality. You must build your own networks of survival and trade. You must educate yourself on the history of these cycles so that you can see the moves before they are made. The $10 trillion shadow only has power as long as you are part of its simulation. Once you see the code, once you see the pattern, the simulation loses its grip. We are entering the most volatile and significant period in human economic history. The decisions you make in the next few years will determine your status for the next several decades. You can choose to be the exit liquidity for a dying system, or you can choose to be the foundation of a new independent reality. The pattern has been laid out before you. The stages are clear. The shadow is moving. The machine is calculating. The reset is coming. The question is no longer what the secret company will do next. The question is what you will do now that the secret is yours. The pattern does not care about your feelings. It does not care about your dreams. It is a cold, mathematical execution of a wealth transfer that has been centuries in the making. The $10 trillion shadow is the final form of this process. It is the consolidation of all human effort into a single digital ledger. But you are more than a data point on a ledger. You are a living, breathing human being with the power to choose. Choose to see the pattern. Choose to prepare for the reset. Choose to step out of the shadow and into the light of reality. Because in the end, the only thing the $10 trillion shadow cannot own is the soul that refuses to be bought, and the mind that refuses to be fooled. The pattern is complete. The stage is set. The shadow is here. And now, for the first time in your life, you know exactly what is happening. The silence of the predator has been broken by the sound of your own awakening. Do not go back to sleep. The future is coming, and it belongs to those who see it for what it truly is. Knowledge is not just power. In the world of the $10 trillion shadow, knowledge is survival. Position yourself accordingly. The reset is not a tragedy for those who are ready. It is an opportunity. Look past the theater, look past the debt, and look straight into the heart of the machine. The pattern is your map. Follow it to freedom. 35.0's info. Google AI models may make mistakes, so double-check outputs. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat.